In the last section, we got a better idea of how caching works in general. We're now going to dive into this cache server and learn a little bit more about how it's actually going to be set up and used inside of our application. Once we learn a little bit more about the caching server, we'll install some software that's going to serve as the caching server for us. So let's get to it. So our caching server is going to be an instance of something called Redis. Redis is an in-memory data store. You can think of it as essentially a tiny database that runs in the memory of your machine and allows you to read and write data very, very quickly. Redis is a data store that operates only in memory, and so that means that once it gets turned off or restarted or anything like that, all the data that sits inside of there is instantly deleted and wiped. So in practice, we only use Redis for data that we feel kind of okay having suddenly disappear into thin air. Because who knows, maybe we lose power or our machine gets restarted, you never know, and we lose all the data that's stored in there. Now Redis is very fast for reading and writing data. So all these qualities come together to make it a fantastic decision for handling something like a caching layer, where we want to make sure that it's very quick for reading data. To interact with this Redis server that we're going to be running on our local machines, we're going to use a library called Node Redis. Now, in fact, the library is only called Redis. This is the Node implementation of the library. So I'm going to call it Node Redis throughout this course, just to make sure that it's really clear when I'm talking about the library that we're going to use to interact with it and the actual Redis server itself. So Node Redis is a JavaScript library that allows us to interact with the server. The server itself is called Redis. If you want to read more about the Redis library, so this is the Node Redis library, just to be clear, you could go to npm and search for the Redis package. And once here, you can read a little bit about how it works. One thing I want you to be aware of, and I want to mention this right away, because this is something that I find a lot of people kind of find a little bit, surprising, I suppose. This Redis library right here doesn't actually give any documentation on commands to manipulate the Redis data store. It only gives you generic commands on how to connect to it and manage the instance, but it doesn't actually tell you how to work with any data stored inside there. The authors behind this package decided that they don't really want to be responsible for writing that documentation. So essentially, they just take any commands that are supposed to manipulate the Redis instance and forward it onto the Redis server. So it's really up to us to use not only the documentation behind this package, but also the documentation for the Redis server itself to figure out how to interact with it. Long story short, the documentation here is not the best. That's kind of what I'm saying. Anyways, let's take a pause right now. We're going to come back in the next video and we're going to install Redis on our local machine. The installation process is different depending on whether you are on Mac OS X or on Windows. So in the next two videos, find your respective operating system and watch that particular video to install Redis locally. All right, quick break and we'll take care of that installation in just a minute.